Good evening and welcome to the first of what will be hopefully many discussion, which I call the armchair monologues. Now the background will be blurred out, but I am sitting in my armchair because I want to have a discussion about the Democratic Party in America and the true danger that it does represent now to the rest of the Western world and indeed the civilized world. Now, I am a staunch supporter of Donald Trump. I have familial ties to America. I'm an English American, but I'm specifically pro-Trump at this point because there has never been in recorded history as much corruption within inside an organization that calls itself democratic as there is currently today in the United States under the Democratic leadership. And if you think I'm wrong, then tell me this. Who is running the country? Is it Joe Biden, who pops up on a radio thing and calls everybody garble? And then accidentally bites a baby when he meant to be nibbling on its feet, but, he's childlike in his dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And what a lot of people don't know is that's the part that goes last. You revert back to a childlike state until you lose all state whatsoever. Now, Joe Biden is as bent and corrupt as they come. The Robert Hur special report, where it showed him to be guilty of the crimes that they were investigating him for, but suggested not prosecuting him because he is now a well-meaning old man with a very poor memory. That's a direct quote from the Robert Hur report. Now, the Democrats say, well, you can't prove evidence of a crime. But Robert Hur did, and that was the first of 7 crimes. And they're all coming out now. The Hunter Biden laptop, we were told, Russian disinformation, 51 CIA or ex-CIA contractors confirmed that, and the FBI ratified it, even though they'd had the Hunter Biden laptop in their headquarters since 2050, yet they ratified that it was Russian disinformation. Now, the investigations have been going on for years in Congress. They've been stonewalled by a number of executive orders taken out by Biden to stop the release of how bad he really was. And that will crumble as soon as he is not president, because any executive order he makes is null and void once he is not the commander-in-chief. And let's face it, he was never the commander-in-chief. I don't know who is giving the exact directions on how America is supposed to be run. It could be Obama. It could be Clinton. It could be Kamala Harris. The point is, all of these ideas, all of these potential negligent people are just ideas. No one can tell me or tell anyone. So if anyone thinks Joe Biden's running the Democrat Party, they need their own brain kind of examined a bit, because he's been null and void since pretty much late 2021. That was the last time he convened a full cabinet meeting. Now, on average, a president has a full cabinet meeting every 1 to 2 weeks. Biden waited roughly 2.5 years between them. And he had a brief one, and then he had a full one, where he spoke for 1 minute and he handed it over to his wife. He said, it's not unheard of for first ladies to be in cabinet briefing. It is. Jackie Kennedy is a slight difference, but overall, first ladies are not security cleared to the level that needs to be in place for you to have a cabinet meeting. And the cabinet meeting that Biden actually convened and then gave over to his wife was therefore illegal. She was being given information she has no clearance to get. But nothing surprises anybody anymore. Now, America is a totalitarian state, and I can prove that by the three things that define totalitarianism. Weaponization of your justice system, persecute your political opponents. Now, notice Putin did that for years, and Biden did it to Trump. Nobody with right-minded and legal thinking can think of anything else that would explain the New York prosecution and the refusal to drop it, even after the Supreme Court ruled that almost everything that was admitted to evidence in the strangest way possible, where they did not have to agree simultaneously on any one crime, 4 of them had to agree that he had committed crimes, and they all had to agree that something he did was wrong. And that was the jury instructions. Only 4 people had to say, well, looking at the evidence, he did commit this misdemeanor. And they came together, and actually they were very separated on what was a misdemeanor, what was federal law, what was malpractice, and what wasn't. And none of them agreed on really anything. But 4 of them agreed on one thing, 4 of them agreed on another, and the other 4 agreed on another. And they negotiated with each other about which 4 potential misdemeanors they could turn into a federal charge. By the time that Trump was halfway through the trial, and the star prosecution witness perjured himself and got caught to be a vindictive liar who only desires the destruction of Donald Trump, meant that the case would be thrown out on appeal anyway. So why do they keep hanging on to it? Why is it okay for Jack Smith to release the entire documentation and evidence that he has, that he wants to produce a new case against Trump for? You can't just release to the public the prosecution's argument with all the documentation for it. And what? The public is the judge and imagine executioner in this idea. And you say that, I don't know, I'm not going to speculate, but the fact is, he was shot once and someone tried to shoot him again, and both of those people have very big question marks over their identity and how they got so close to someone so important, and how the Secret Service was surveilling Matthew Crooks for 40 minutes before he even climbed on the roof. And they knew about him before he attended the rally. And then the other guy, who, as witness testaments say, he had no pennies to rub together. He was always trying to borrow cash. He lived in a place that you wouldn't have if you had any money. And yet, he was able to travel to 4 different countries, and he started recruiting Afghan militants to fight in the war for Ukraine. Now, soldiers have testified that there was something very strange about this man, that in fact his ties were very much to more, not mafia, but underworld crime boss type ties. And they couldn't work out where he was getting his funding. His wife gave up on support with the child years before because he could never make the money. So how did he find the thousands of dollars even just to travel, let alone survive? And how did he move from Wisconsin to Hawaii? And he was only in Hawaii for 2 or 3 months, and then suddenly he turns up near Mar-a-Lago with weaponry he can't afford, with a clear line of sight to the most vulnerable place on that golf course, which whenever Donald Trump is playing golf, ordinarily someone is at that perimeter and within eye shot of that specific place at every time. How did he get through? You can speculate. The worst answer is obvious. But the best answer is absolute severe incompetency for which everyone involved would be dismissed from their office. The worst answer is that he was deliberately hung out to dry, hoping that they would succeed. Now, that's the quiet part out loud. That is what a lot of people around the world are thinking. And don't think we don't think about your election in America, because everybody does. Because most people are not far left, radical, woke ideologues. Most people reject that. Most people reject gender-affirming care, which is a new phrase since they declassified gender dysphoria as a mental health disorder in 2019, because there was no need for a phrase like that. But it came about because they started doing it to children, so child butchery came on the scene. Now, the Haas report in England is comprehensive. So is the WPATH leaked files, which shows that the people who were advising every gender clinic in the Western world didn't have the qualifications that they claimed they had. And, I mean, there's a video in it where they're pretty much telling one of their directors to perform surgery on somebody he doesn't think knows what's going on. And their reasoning was, has she signed the paperwork? Have her parents signed the paperwork? Well, then you're not responsible. But he knew she was schizophrenic, and he thought she may have multiple personality disorder. And he didn't think that she knew what was going on in any way, shape, or form. And he tried to push back against his colleagues, but they all lambasted him for even suggesting not going ahead with gender-affirming care, i.e. child butchery. Trans surgery was what trans people fought for when they got equal rights. Gender-affirming care is collateral, democratic, left-leaning garbage about gender identity that applies it to children. Now, as a psychologist, I can tell you exactly that developmental stages of a human brain last until you're 35 years old. Now, they go in 7 years, so years 0 to 7, years 7 to 14, 14 to 21, 21 to 28, and 28 to 35. Now, obviously, you're more impressionable the younger you are. But if you're under 18, your brain is not even close to fully formed. Now, I'd ask anyone who's over 18 to think back to how they were when they were 18 and the decisions they made. And if they can honestly say, I stand by everything that I thought 20 years ago, I'm fair play. I personally can't. I can't even stand by that and say I still feel the same as I did 10 years ago about a whole myriad of things. I now, at 42, I'm pretty settled in my beliefs, my opinions, my desires, what I can possibly achieve, what's realistic, and I try and manage my own expectations because I don't want to be caught out that way. But Christ, at 28, I went through a bit of a crisis period and I did things that were uncharacteristic of who I thought I was. Then I realised a few years later that that's part of who I am. So the idea that a 14-year-old, nay, a 10-year-old, can make an informed decision about gender-affirming care is as ridiculous as saying a mass murderer should run a lunatic asylum. I say that for effect, but it's also pretty damn accurate. A 10-year-old has no more idea about sex and gender than a 1-year-old. They might know it's a thing, and for God's sake, the world has made it something. It should have been simply stamped out. No. That's something you can address as an adult. Now, I'm going to call it transmania. This happened since 2019 when they declassified all of that stuff. And the reason I say that is because at that time and for 35 years previously, the highest estimate of people who suffered with gender dysphoria, i.e. could call themselves trans, was 0.004%. I can go lower to the lowest estimate, which is 0.00041%. That's a fifth fraction away from a percent. So effectively, the rise in people who are trans are at least 500,000 to 1 more than they were 5 years ago. There's no psychological, there's no scientific, and there's no explanation in any type of biology as to why that's happened. And people will say, oh, well, people were always trans and there's history. No, absolute rubbish. None of that history that's claimed by the people who are genderqueer or whatever they call themselves is true. There are no ancient civilizations that saw people as a third gender and worshipped them because they were better than everyone else. If you look up the first 100 genders they came up with, 85% of them say that thing. And they say the Incas, they talk about the Aborigines in Australia, but it all leads to people who don't conform to male or female are a third gender who were always revered throughout history. So why are we just finding this out now when it's convenient to them? Well, I'll say because it's absolute bollocks and there's nothing they can do to assert their absolute falsifiable claims about the history of the world. And that comes on to the history of the world. Now, I did a recent piece about emojis, and I think, well, language actually, cavemen were sophisticated enough to express their feelings by pictures. Then the Mesopotamian Empire used pictures and words, and they invented language. But it wasn't sophisticated language. It was a word and a picture. And that would then further describe what you're trying to discuss. And yet, 3,000 years ago, Socrates and Aristotle had mastered language and philosophy and had written amazing works. And they weren't alone. I point those throughout for obvious reasons because they're famous, but there were many, many Greek philosophers. In fact, philosophy was the main kind of, it's either being part of politics or being in philosophy, being a teacher, which was widely considered the same thing at the time, and would be welcome back in the world if our teachers were philosophers and they thought as they taught, then the world would be a much better place, everyone would be much better educated, and people would question the status quo and what people consider to be the norm that they conform to. But sadly, philosophy is something that actually you wouldn't know a modern day philosopher, yet you probably are one. But you might be. I am. I think a lot. I think too much. I don't think incorrectly. I don't think too much. And that leads me into something else. Depressive realism. Now, there are two things. You can take your pick. Depressive realism is somebody who is prone to negative thinking, but wants to be optimistic. So that includes every philosopher and leader of modern day history up until roughly 1980. And then it all became unfashionable. Julius Caesar, philosopher. Genghis Khan, a deep thinker. I wouldn't say he's a philosopher because he never wrote it down, but a deep thinker, fantastic strategical general. In fact, him and Julius Caesar are probably the best general in history. You have the whole of the French Renaissance. You have Immanuel Kant. You have almost the entirety of what was the upper class turned into philosophy after the revolution. You've got of course, I'm not going to go into them. I actually refuse to read them. I've read Kant or Kant, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I like Kant because I don't like his writing. But Aristotle, he's very interesting. Euripides, very interesting. These are people who shape the world. And we forget them at our peril. Because we don't have people of that kind of moral fortitude hanging around anymore. And I'm going to bring this right back to the Democratic Party that is elected and now represents the United States government and, therefore, the leadership of the free world. But who is the leader? Because it can't be the demented one who got elected. I know no more than you. I can only guess. But if I were to guess a bit deeper, I would think it's a bit deeper than the people we see on television. Lord Soros recently got into trouble. Someone bailed that out. I think the people who actually really play this game in politics and have radicalised the left wing to go after things like gender affirming care, DEI, CRT, teaching children how to be racist, who to be racist to and when to be racist to them. And the idea that, and this comes from Joe Biden in 2020, that America is built on systemic racism. That came from the leader of the free world, for Christ's sake. And what's happened since? Well, Robin DiAngelo wrote a book, White Fragility. And none of it was researched. Not one chapter could be peer-reviewed, and not one chapter would have been accepted as even a premise for a doctoral thesis. Yet she wrote that book and changed the entire culture because people got on board with it. Now, if I'm a white supremacist and I've had all the luxuries in life, then why have I had to fight so goddamn often? Why was I gang raped in a foreign jail? Why was I kidnapped and tortured in that same country? And I'm not a soldier. I happen to be a volunteer in a third world corrupt country, and bad things happen to me. I really haven't had anything good happen to me that I didn't force since I was about 7 years old. So I'm 42 years old and I'm a heterosexual white male. Congratulations, me. Honestly, and I say this with absolute heresy. They say walk a mile in a man's shoes. I would strongly suggest no one dips a toe into my shoes because it would destroy their entire body. I think if anyone jumped into my body, they would have an immediate heart attack because I'm dying from, unfortunately, what everyone tells me was foolish, but I heard a girl screaming for help. I went to run. Turns out there was 2 girls and 6 immigrants trying to sexually assault them. So I knew I had to get in the middle of it and get the girls out of the way, and I did. But they tried to kill me and they beat my brain in. And so I have a metal pole, 6 of them. And at one point they had me by all 4 limbs, banging my head into a wall. It was an absolute cataclysm. And they thought they'd succeeded in killing me. But I woke up. And life since then has been quite a difficult, slow murder, but I put up with it. What motivates me? Well, honestly, if Kamala Harris gets elected, I don't think much will motivate me anymore, except to understand the speed at which she can destroy the world, the speed at which the left-leaning people will allow this absolute change in societal values, destroying all of the values that came from religion in a world that I'm not specifically subscribed to religion, but in a world where it was necessary as a moral compass until the Age of Enlightenment. And even after that, because if you try and take Catholicism from South America, you will have what is actually going to be a revolution in every country. Because they cling on to their belief in God, because it makes them fight harder to keep their success. But yet, the person who's running for president of the United States, the Democrat Party, has fought the least and has had the least success, she has the worst CV of anyone who's ever applied to run any kind of senior office in politics in the free world. Honestly, like, it's of 1,000 CVs, it'll be the first one you discard. But yet, he's half a chance of winning. It's insane. Mark Zuckerberg went to Congress this year and dropped 10,000 pages of documents saying the Biden and Harris campaign, of which she is CC'd in many of these documents, basically pressured him, although whether, he's just having a change of heart now and was up for it at the time, who knows, but as he says, pressured him, and the emails do back that up, to censor COVID information, which caused many thousands of, tens and tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 lives to be lost because the real information couldn't be released to the public. And then the Hunter Biden laptop story, and I'm coming back to that because they've done the polls. For 3 years they've been doing the polls. If that story had come to light at the time when it was supposed to, Joe Biden would have lost by about 14 points on average. That's a 3-year average. So that is election interference. I hate to use the phrase American phrase 101, but it is. I mean, there is no higher level of election interference than the CIA, the FBI, and the private citizen who was the presidential nominee colluding together to create a fabricated story for the American people, and none of them have been held culpable. Alejandro Mayorkas has been impeached by the Congress and the Senate. It's Joe Biden's job to sack him. Yet he still runs the border. He ran the FEMA response to the hurricane. It was a week late. I mean, he's not known for being very good at his deliverables, but it was a week late, and many people, who knows, but they suggest many people died unnecessarily because of his unreaction. Christopher Wray, head of the FBI. After the election, a report will be released which states that January the 6th was orchestrated by Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat Party, and the FBI. And there were more than 200 FBI agents or assets dressed up in MAGA gear, some of them inside the Capitol, and one of them was one of the two who broke in the doors. The one who wasn't an FBI agent is still in jail. The one who was never even got questioned. But yeah, the video evidence is now there to see. They broke in together. And inside, there were up to 15 people to direct them around the Capitol building. Now, understand the Capitol building in America, there are no names on any doors. You have to know exactly where you're going, or you need someone to take you. And they happen to work their way to Nancy Pelosi's office. Now, as far as the Capitol goes, The Speaker of the House is absolutely in charge. She can override a president when it comes to that. Which is exactly what she did, because Donald Trump really made a massive point, like for the previous days, of saying, I think you need to heighten security, you need a National Guard and the army on standby. I have a lot of supporters and they're coming to the Capitol to make their voices heard. She refused. She then claimed she had no conversation with the National Guard. Telephone records got subpoenaed, shows she spoke to the head of the National Guard 3 times, and not for a short period. There's also a video of her in her car confessing to the whole thing. But yet, for some reason, Democrats have kept this secret. Now, please don't take my word for it. A congressman who was part of that committee did a full comprehensive interview, which is on my YouTube page. But it was with Tucker Carlson. And because the Democrats managed to get it postponed until after the election, he took it upon himself to tell the whole story, as he was one of the people who ratified the finality of the report, which implicates the entirety of the leadership of the FBI and the Democrat Party in causing an insurrection for the purposes of entrapment. And you'll wonder that the far-right activists of that day are, by and large, they were all arrested, they all served time, and many of them are still in jail. But the left-wing activists of the Summer of Love of 2021, which Kamala Harris actively, verbally encouraged, saying their voices need to be heard. $2.2 billion worth of damage, dead policemen, burnt down precincts, churches, everything. I mean, it was catastrophic. And let's face it, George Floyd was not a role model. God, if anybody should not be put on a pedestal, it would be a fentanyl-ridden serial criminal. Now, I'm not saying what happened to him was correct. What I'm saying is, like someone suggested, changing the statue of George Washington to George Floyd. It's like, why? The only thing he achieved in his life was making a massive mess of his death. Other than that, he was a drug-riddled criminal who was driving a car while high off his bricks on fentanyl. Now, the policeman, I've seen the video, other things could have been done. I'm not suggesting that that isn't the case. But had they not stopped him, he was out of his brains on synthetic heroin that's 5 or 10 times stronger than the real thing. How many blocks would he have got before he killed somebody? Or a family? You know? And then that would just be, underwritten crime statistics from, we don't know that. Anyone who's not white who commits a crime, we don't want to prosecute or discuss. But anyone who is white, and even if they make a misdemeanor, God, we will punish them to the end of the earth. And that is the attitude of the Democratic Party. They're represented by somebody who simply just repeats whatever is, what's been fed to her, but she's kind of learnt her lines. But I'm sorry, I have to fast forward through news where she's speaking, because there's only so many times you can hear the bile, the threat to democracy claim. You're like, God, the guy's already been president, just give it up. And if he's a real threat to democracy, how is it that 50% of America want him to be president? Okay, the messaging isn't working. And the more you double down and triple down and quadruple down, and in fact quintuple down as I did today, the less real it seems. I looked at the headlines of the biased left-wing propaganda machine. By the way, to be a totalitarian, you need weaponized justice system, a spy agency that censors and spies on your own citizens, which they have in the FBI and the CIA. That's been proved by Mark Zuckerberg, and control of the media by propaganda. Now, very few people in America, well, not very few, but so many people in America believe that Trump has said all the things that they claim he said. They're entirely incorrect. He is charismatic and he does go too far with his words, But everything, and it's put beautifully like this, everything that Kamala Harris does is take clips of what Donald Trump has said, and Biden did the same. The Fine People hoax in Charlottesville is one of the worst crimes on a human being's personality that could ever be committed. I honestly hope Joe Biden spends the rest of his eternity in hell. I wouldn't say that about many people, but Joe Biden was never not a crooked politician. He was crooked from the 70s. He's got a 50-year career, and everyone's commending him for it, but he was bent all the way through. And there's so much evidence that backs that up. But unfortunately, part of it was disregarded because he's a senile old man, and the other is locked up by executive order. But yet, Kamala Harris is running for the top seat in the world, and she's running on the message that I'm not Donald Trump, and I'm not a threat to democracy. She claims he's going to pass a federal abortion ban. He's on record for years saying he'd veto anything of the sort. He's the most pro-choice president that the Republicans have ever had. They claim about IVF. He's already put into policy he'll fund the whole thing because he wants more babies, because the birth rate under the idea of identity politics and the left-wing government and the inflation have led to the birth rate dropping from 2.1 to 1.6, and that's kind of reciprocated in England and parts of Europe, and no part of Europe is at that 2. Well, there is 2 countries that are at 2.1, but nobody is reproducing at the rate that they're losing people, which is why immigration becomes such a big thing. And look at honestly, if there's anything that could be seen as the most egregious and criminal act, would be tearing up Romanian Mexico and inventing a scheme called Catch and Release, which recently was found out, and this is just the tip of a very, very big iceberg, but a man hacked 2 people to death with that. Turns out he was wanted for 23 murders, and that information was available to the border security if they'd asked for it, but instead he was caught and released into the interior of the USA. How do they know he was wanted for 23 murders? Because he had the faces and names of his victims tattooed on his body. When they contacted, I believe it's Peru, I may be wrong, it may be Paraguay, but one of the two, when they contacted their particular defense ministry or whatever they contacted, yeah, he's a serial killer. But yeah, he was caught and then released to kill in America. And honestly, God knows how many Venezuelans are going to commit murder in America. I mean, we're looking, 150 in the last year? That could multiply by 10 in a year. It can multiply by 100 in 4 years. Those guys are probably the worst gang that we've ever heard of. They have the absolute authority from their heads in Venezuela to execute police on sight if the police try and stop them from being suspected of a crime. The police pulls them over. They have the authority of the official heads of the Nicaragua to shoot the police on sight. They send shivers down every criminal gang near them because they have no scruples. They have no moral compass that we can identify with. And yet they're terrorizing America. Jocelyn Hungary, Laken Riley, they are the tip of the iceberg of victims. But they are examples of exactly that. Had they not torn up Romania, Mexico, had they not come up with this idea of catch and release, which does lend itself towards the conspiracy theory that what they wanted was enough immigrants inside the US to fraudulently vote for the Democrats to keep them in power. I'm not going to go down that route as to whether that was their initial plan. The fact is, that when Donald Trump says 25 million, he's probably not far from the truth, because 12 million is the official encounters at the southern border. The northern border in 2024 has had 20 times the encounters of any year previous to that. There's the border in California, which is not an official point of entry, but it's an unofficial point of illegal entry. Then there's the 2 million gotaways, and that's the ones they know got away. Then there's the unknown number of who they don't know got away. Then there's a chat, whatever, GPY, I think it's called, application where you can seek asylum from South America, make an appointment at the border where you will be immediately interviewed for 20 minutes and released into the interior of the United States with no background checks. And that's not reported in that 12 million figure. And this year is 1.1 million. Also, they're flying in immigrants and giving them not asylum, full citizenship. And apparently now that's about roughly 2.6 million people have been flown in, and Biden, unfortunately, well, it makes the numbers look better. Yes, it does if you lie about them. Yes. Numbers always look better if you inflate or deflate them depending on what you need. So I ask anyone in America, anyone with a sense of sensibility, anyone with a modicum of moral fortitude, to fact check everything I've just said. Just do it. Fact check it. AI is very simple. ChatGPT is the first one. Grok is the one that Elon Musk has on Twitter. What they do is you type in any question you want. I've typed in a question which is 40 lines long, and it answers it in about 17 pages. But you can find out any bit of information. I'll leave you with this. Google Kevin Hooper, Kamala Harris, DNA evidence, scandal, and you'll find that she locked up a man, put him on death row, which is not her fault. The evidence suggested it. Then DNA evidence came out proving he was innocent. How easy would it have been to say, well, at the time, the judgment I made was correct, I believe, because of the evidence that I had. But now this new evidence shows he's innocent, so obviously I made a mistake. I'm sorry about that. I did the best I had with the evidence I had. Nobody would really blink an eye at that. But she didn't want the bad mark on her record. So he spent months on death row, knowing that Kamala Harris was withholding the evidence that exonerated him. And she refused to give it up. It had to be taken from her by a legal subpoena by an alternative attorney general. And that is the woman who is running for the head of the Democrat Party and the top seat in the world. And she has the character, as that last scandal demonstrates, of a tapeworm. Now, Google that story, because it is absolutely correct. The only thing I'm not sure about from memory is the amount of months that he had to sit innocently on death row while she tried to prevent the evidence from being submitted. Anyone who does that is not qualified to manage anyone else. They're barely qualified to manage their own life. And they're a hairbreadth away from being the head of the free world. And honestly, I truly believe, and I fight for this every day, that I don't get paid, I don't care. All I care about, because I'll die before I'm 50. I don't want the world to be dying with me. I like to know that it has some hope left in it. With Kamala Harris, I can guarantee that the next 4 years, it may bring about World War III, but if it doesn't, it will bring about something as significant in terms of societal damage and irreparable damage to the idea of Western democracies that it is unfathomable, if you know the truth, that you could even hover your pen over her name. So check everything I've said. See if I'm incorrect. And Merrick Garland, by the way, who's also the head of the DOJ, the only reason he hasn't been arrested for treason is because the DOJ refuses to arrest their boss. Otherwise, he would be. So look it all up. Everything I've said is I've watched literally 4 years of Congress and the Senate debating these things. The whole January 6th thing, I watched it from its infancy, and initially I was like, I'm not sure about all this. And with every scandal, I've looked at it with that attitude, like, a bit far-fetched. And then the evidence starts to come through, and you're like, sounding a bit less far-fetched. Hold on. That's an admission of guilt. For example, Christopher Wray has deflected quite well. He's made several admissions of guilt over January the 6th. And when the report comes out, he will no doubt resign. And many people in the FBI will be fired, and some will have to serve prison time for what they did. And the CIA, well, they lost their top three, the director and 2 associate directors involved in the Hunter Biden thing were sacked. And now they have a new director, and we're supposed to trust him. Now, I'm sorry, but I honestly can't think of a worse place to live than a world where Islamic immigration is catapulting itself into Europe at a rate no one ever suspected. No one ever considered that there'd be this mass migration of people over a short period of time. Now, we've had migration for a long period, but the mass migration is really concentrated in this last 4-year period. And it's causing division in every democracy, and the head of it, who is much more a supporter of Hamas than she ever would be Israel, is running to lead us all into oblivion. So with that, I'll leave it there. I don't know how people will take this kind of discussion, but you can be damn sure I haven't said anything I don't inherently believe to be exactly accurate. And with all of the statistics, you can fact check them yourselves. When I say OpenAI, there's like 15 of them. All of them do the same thing. They take all of the data from the internet and they use it to answer your question. Type in Kevin Hooper, Kamala Harris, DNA evidence scandal. It will tell you everything you need to know about that woman. And if you vote for her after that, shame on you. So, I'm going to leave it there. It's been fun. Actually, it hasn't been fun. Had to get it off my chest, to be honest. But hopefully, somebody listen. Even one person. If one person doesn't vote for Kamala Harris because I've made this video, it's taken me nearly 50 minutes. But it was worth it for that one person. Hopefully that's you. So you be good. And I'll be left. Take it easy. Beat you soon.